So that's kind of talking something about the beginning of the Bible. Now, kind of fast forwarding a bit to the end of the Bible, something else that we get in Christian circles is
Mm,
discussion on the rapture.
mm,
With my background in movies, I grew up watching, and even just pastors I grew up listening to, there's this strong emphasis on
mm,
the rapture, that,
mm,
this view of Revelation that, there's going to be this awful time on earth, but that the church is going to be taken out before that.
mm,
We're all going to disappear and go up into the sky, and everyone else is going to be left, and that there'll be a
mm,
time of terrible judgment, and that then Jesus will return to judge the world. And that's one
right.
interpretation of Revelation. But the question is that the only interpretation? In
Mm,
your opinion, is that the biblical view, or is it one amongst many possible
yeah.
views?
Well, you're very gracious to lay it out like that because, as you alluded to, there are Christians that take different viewpoints as to what the rapture means or how that works. So I think the best way I would say is this: if by the rapture you mean Jesus Christ is going to come back and take his saints with him, that very general idea, that clearly is biblical, that when he comes back, he will in fact take us with him to meet him in the air, as Paul said in First Thessalonians and also in First Corinthians 15. But what I would say is um, maybe what most people differ on is when that will happen.
Mm,
And what you just described there is what's known as a pre-tribulational view of the rapture, which is a very popular view. In fact, many books were written on that. And quite frankly, many people came to know the Lord uh, through that view. Personally, for myself, I think that while I respect that position, I would say that's getting into the issue maybe just a little bit too um, specifically, if you will. I
mm,
think the Bible doesn't really go to that extent. I think
mm,
it's probably safer to say Christ is going to come back. He's going to take us up with him to meet him in the air. Um, as to when that is, there's room for believers to differ. I
mm.
personally believe that when Christ comes back um, to take us with him in the air, he will then, at that point, bring in, as it were, uh, the second coming,
Mm,
usher in his reign on earth.
mm,
And I would say that I don't create two layers of him coming
mhm.
to take us out of the tribulation period and then to return again to now then reign as king. So
Yeah.
this is where I would differ with
Yeah.
that view.
I think that's helpful, like, at the front end for our viewers to hear that, in certain circles might put this forward as, like, this is the Christian view, and if you differ from that, you're just wrong.
Mhm,
And like you
mhm,
said, it's a little more mysterious than that,
mhm.
There's room, and we're even told, we can't know when he's gonna come back,
Right.
that we should just live faithfully where we're at and be
Mhm,
prepared for him to come at any time.
mhm,
But even like you said, I kinda grew up hearing that and kind of by default believing that. But even
mhm,
as I just started reading and studying the Bible more on my own,
mhm,
it didn't seem to be the model that was played out in
mhm,
the New Testament, in
mhm.
Revelation prophecies. It seems like there's gonna be a second coming of Christ, not a second and a third coming.
That's right.
Um,
That's
and
right.
even historically with the church, it doesn't seem that we've been pulled out of times of suffering, just
Mhm.
because it's hard, or even just times of judgment, but
Yes.
that God has strategically used his children in times of
Mhm,
suffering to
mhm.
bring more to the faith. And if there's really gonna
Yes.
be this time of tribulation and suffering and judgment on the earth, it seems that there's not gonna be people to make disciples and to share the gospel
Mhm,
if the church is pulled
mhm.
out. So it makes
That's right.
sense that God, in his love and mercy, is gonna use his church to redeem people before the end comes.
That's right. And I think one quick thing to say is the church has always been in the midst of suffering, has always existed in that milieu, and so therefore, for us to undergo suffering is normal. That really should be, because we're to witness for the Lord in the midst of
Mm,
suffering,
mm,
not to be, not to escape it.
Mm,
The other reason why some people believe that there has to be this taking out of the church during this time known as the tribulation is because the idea there is, well, the tribulation is supposed to be God pouring out his judgment on the earth. And there is definitely that. But and so of course the point is well, God certainly wouldn't want his people to undergo his judgment.
mm,
And if the tribulation is that, well, then God's punishing his people.
mm,
But I would say this: God knows how to protect his own, even as
mm,
he is judging the world in
mm,
the midst of the tribulation period.
mm, mhm,
So I would say this: God will protect his own,
mhm,
even in the midst of that. And my biblical support for that would be, or at least the analogy would be, remember when Moses was,
mm,
you know, telling Pharaoh to let my people go, the whole of Egypt underwent the 10 plagues, right?
mm,
Well, guess who lived in Egypt as well? God's people, Israel. And yet we know that God protected
mm,
his people, and and all of these things occurred to the Egyptians, but
mm,
nowhere there do you find that the Israelites were the ones suffering as well.
mm.
So there's a sense in which I think we can safely say that God knows how to protect his home. And there's no need to necessarily demand that the church be taken out
Mm,
in the time of tribulation. If anything, that's the time when the church should shine
mm.
um, and
Yeah.
be the witness.
And that's a really cool parallel. I was just thinking about that as you were saying that, just connecting it to in Exodus, that we see many of the cups of wrath in Revelation are very similar, if not the same,
Mm,
as the
mm,
plagues that happen
mm,
in Exodus. And like you said, he protects the Jews during that
mm,
time.
mm.
That through that, as they leave, not only did the Jews leave, but even some Egyptians went with them.
That's
I
right.
just think about that in the time of this tribulation, that it could quite possibly be the same thing, that as he protects
Yeah.
his people during this time of wrath, he's
Mhm.
ultimately gonna even deliver more people through them as he takes us to the ultimate promised land.